The stage is set. Post-war Glasgow. To understand the lives of Arthur Thompson, Tam MacGraw, Jimmy Boyle, and Paul Ferris, one must first understand the city that created them. Glasgow in the post-war era was a city of immense contrast and social transformation. It was a place renowned for its industrial might, its shipbuilding, and its engineering prowess. But it was also a city grappling with the slow decline of those very industries. This economic shift created pockets of severe deprivation and unemployment. Many communities, particularly in the East End and areas like the Gorbals, faced significant challenges. Overcrowded tenement housing was the norm for many working-class families. These conditions fostered a strong sense of community and resilience, but they also created an environment where survival often depended on street smarts and toughness. For some young men, the path of legitimate work seemed to offer little reward. The alternative, a life on the margins of the law, could appear more immediately gratifying. It is within this complex social fabric that the stories of our four subjects begin. They were not born into a vacuum of crime. They were products of a specific time and place. Their choices, while ultimately their own, were shaped by these powerful external forces. This narrative aims to explore their lives from a sociological and historical perspective. The purpose is to document and educate, not to glorify or sensationalize. The focus will be on the consequences of their actions, both for themselves and for society. We will examine the law enforcement response to their activities. We will also consider the immense toll that organized crime takes on communities. The illegal drug trade, in particular, has left a legacy of addiction and suffering. This is an inescapable part of this history. The four men we will focus on represent different archetypes within this world. Arthur Thompson became known as the godfather of Glasgow's underworld. His career spanned decades, and his influence was widespread. He represented an older model of organized crime, based on fear and respect. Tam MacGraw, known as the licensee, represented a new era. He was a criminal entrepreneur who approached illegal activities like a business. His operations were sophisticated, focusing on large-scale drug trafficking and money laundering. Jimmy Boyle's story is one of profound notoriety and subsequent transformation. Once labeled Scotland's most violent prisoner, he underwent a remarkable rehabilitation. His life serves as a complex case study in redemption and the power of art. Paul Ferris's journey is one of violence, legal battles, and reinvention. He was a central figure in the gangland conflicts of the 1980s and 1990s. He later became an author, presenting his own narrative of those events. These four lives are interconnected through violence, rivalry, and the shared landscape of Glasgow. Their stories provide a window into a hidden history of the city. A history that operates in the shadows, but whose effects are felt by all. As we proceed, we will delve into the specifics of each man's life. We will trace their rise, their peak of influence, and their eventual downfalls or transformations. We will analyze the methods they used to gain and maintain power. We will look at the police operations that sought to bring them to justice. And we will never lose sight of the human costs of their actions, the cost to the victims of violence, the cost to the communities ravaged by drugs, the cost to their own families and loved ones. This is a sober examination of a difficult chapter in Scottish social history. It is a story that needs to be told with accuracy and responsibility. We begin our journey with the man who would become known as the Godfather, Arthur Thompson. His story is the foundation upon which much of the modern Glasgow underworld was built. From the tough streets of the Proven Mill estate, he built an empire of fear. His methods were brutal, his influence vast, and his legacy complex. But that is a story for the next part. This introduction has set the stage, providing the essential context of time and place. The following sections will bring the key players to the forefront. We will see how the environment of post-war Glasgow shaped their destinies. And we will learn the brutal truths about life at the top of the criminal underworld. A world where power is always temporary and violence is never far away.
The Godfather of Glasgow, Arthur Thompson. Arthur Thompson's story begins in the heart of Glasgow's East End. He was born in 1931, and his early years were shaped by the harsh realities of pre-war and post-war Scotland. The Thompson family was not wealthy, and life in the Proven Mill area was a daily struggle. From a young age, Arthur demonstrated a sharp mind and a fierce determination. These traits, which in another context might have led to legitimate success, were channeled into the criminal world. His initial forays into crime were relatively minor, but they quickly escalated. He learned the fundamentals of power on the streets of Glasgow. He understood that control was not just about violence, but about influence. He built a reputation as a man who could get things done for a price. His early criminal enterprises focused on traditional activities. Protection rackets were a cornerstone of his operation. Business owners, particularly publicans, were encouraged to pay for security. Those who refused often found their premises damaged or their customers intimidated. This created a steady stream of illicit income and established his authority. Another key revenue source was illegal money lending, or loan sharking. He provided loans to those who could not access traditional banks. The interest rates were extortionate, and the collection methods were brutal. This practice trapped many vulnerable people in cycles of debt and fear. As his wealth and influence grew, so did his ambitions. He moved into larger-scale operations, including organized theft and fraud. He was a master of that fraud, a complex crime that demonstrated his strategic mind. He was always thinking several steps ahead of both his rivals and the police. His base of operations was his home, a fortified bungalow on Muirhouse Road. The property was known locally as the Ponderosa, a name that hinted at its scale and notoriety. It was equipped with reinforced doors, security cameras, and a panic room. This fortress was a clear statement of his status and his perpetual state of alert. Thompson was not a flamboyant gangster who sought the limelight. He operated with a quiet, calculating menace that was often more effective than overt threats. He preferred to resolve disputes from behind the scenes, his word acting as final. This earned him the nickname the Godfather, a title bestowed out of respect and fear. His personal life was deeply intertwined with his criminal empire. He married Margaret, a woman who was considered every bit as tough as her husband. She was his staunch defender and a formidable partner in his life. Together they had 2 children, Arthur Jr. and Rita. The concept of a criminal dynasty was central to Thompson's vision. He saw his empire not as a temporary venture, but as a legacy to be passed on. He began grooming his son, Arthur Thompson Jr., to be his heir apparent. This decision would prove to be one with profound and tragic consequences. Arthur Jr. was a very different character from his father. Where the father was disciplined and strategic, the son was volatile and reckless. He enjoyed the trappings of his father's wealth, but lacked the cunning to manage it. He developed serious personal issues, including a reported cocaine addiction. This created a vulnerability within the Thompson organization. Rivals saw the aging godfather and his flawed son as potential weak links. The most significant threat emerged from a young, ambitious man from the Black Hill estate. His name was Paul Ferris, and his rivalry with the Thompsons would become legendary. The first major blow in this feud was struck in 1987. Arthur Thompson Jr. was lured to a meeting at a garage in Barnalack. It was a trap. He was ambushed and shot multiple times at point-blank range. Miraculously, he survived the attack, but he was left with severe, life-altering injuries. The shooting of his son was a direct and brutal challenge to Arthur Thompson Sr.'s authority. The Godfather was now engaged in a deeply personal war. The hunt for the perpetrators was relentless. He used all his resources and influence to find those responsible. The police were also investigating, but they were competing with a parallel, unofficial investigation. The streets of Glasgow were tense, expecting a violent retaliation. Thompson's response was swift, but the once calculating Godfather was now acting on emotion. This emotional response weakened his position and made him more isolated. The empire he had built over decades began to show cracks under the strain. Then, in 1991, Arthur Thompson Sr. died from a heart attack at his home. He did not die in a shootout, but from natural causes. His death marked the end of an era in Glasgow's underworld. His funeral was a massive spectacle, attended by hundreds. The police filmed the event, documenting the who's who of the criminal landscape. With Thompson's death, his empire quickly disintegrated. Arthur Jr. was in no state to assume control, and no clear successor emerged. The story of Arthur Thompson Sr. is a classic tale of rise and fall. He built a powerful criminal organization through intelligence and ruthlessness. But his desire for a dynasty led to a fatal vulnerability. His life demonstrates the precarious nature of power built on fear and violence. It shows that even the most powerful figures are not immune to personal tragedy. And it proves that in the criminal underworld, no empire is built to last. The criminal entrepreneur, Tam the licensee MacGraw. While Arthur Thompson represented the old guard of Glasgow's criminal underworld, a new generation was emerging. This new generation approached crime with a more corporate, business-like mindset. The most prominent figure of this new era was Tam the licensee MacGraw. His nickname reflected his belief that he was licensed to print money through his criminal enterprises. MacGraw operated from the Barlanark housing scheme in Glasgow's East End. He was born in 1953 and grew up during the city's period of industrial decline. Like many of his contemporaries, he saw limited opportunities in the legitimate economy. His criminal career began with violent but relatively straightforward crimes. He was involved in armed robberies and post office raids during his early years. These crimes carried high risks and required careful planning. However, MacGraw soon realized that the future of crime was in narcotics. The potential profits from drugs dwarfed those from traditional robberies. He began to shift his focus towards large-scale drug trafficking. His organization, often referred to as the Barlanark Team or the Berg, became highly disciplined. Unlike the personality-driven Thompson organization, MacGraw's group operated like a business. There was a clear structure with specific roles and responsibilities. MacGraw's genius lay in his understanding of logistics and international networks. He established reliable supply chains from drug producers in Spain and the Netherlands. He used sophisticated methods to import drugs into Scotland. This included using vehicles with hidden compartments and exploiting commercial shipping routes. The scale of his operations was enormous. At its peak, his organization was believed to be one of the largest drug trafficking networks in the UK. The primary drugs were cannabis and ecstasy, which were in high demand during the 1990s. The profits were astronomical, estimated to be in the tens of millions of pounds. MacGraw understood that vast criminal wealth was useless if it couldn't be spent openly. He became a master of money laundering, reinvesting his profits into legitimate businesses. He owned pubs, nightclubs, property development companies, and even a children's soft play center. These businesses provided a legitimate cover for his wealth and a means to clean his money. He lived a life of overt luxury, with expensive cars and a custom-built mansion. This public display of wealth was a statement of his success and power. Unlike Thompson, MacGraw managed to avoid serious violence for much of his career. He preferred bribery, coercion, and strategic alliances to murder. He was a master of corruption, cultivating contacts within various institutions. This network of influence provided him with protection and information. He was arrested numerous times, but consistently avoided conviction. Witnesses would change their stories or refuse to testify. Evidence would sometimes disappear or become compromised. The Crown Prosecution Service found him a frustratingly elusive target. Law enforcement agencies knew he was a major crime lord, but proving it was incredibly difficult. His ability to avoid prison earned him a reputation as untouchable. In his local community, MacGraw cultivated a Robin Hood image. He was known for his acts of generosity and community support. He would pay for funerals for families who couldn't afford them. He donated money to local youth clubs and sports teams. He helped individuals with debts and other personal problems. This generated significant local support and a powerful wall of silence. Many people in Barlinark saw him not as a criminal, but as a benefactor. This public persona was carefully managed and highly effective. However, it stood in contrast to the reality of his trade. The drugs his organization sold caused immense harm to communities across Scotland. Addiction, overdose deaths, and drug-related crime were the direct consequences of his business. The social cost was enormous, but MacGraw was able to distance himself from it. He presented himself as a businessman, not a drug dealer. His personal life was turbulent, affected by the pressures of his criminal career. He was married to Margaret, and they had a family together. But the constant threat of violence and imprisonment cast a long shadow. The stress of his lifestyle took a significant toll on his health. He developed a serious heart condition, a physical manifestation of his stressful existence. The turning point in MacGraw's career came with the rise of a new, more violent gang. The Daniels family emerged as a powerful rival in the Glasgow drug trade. They were younger, more aggressive, and less constrained by the old codes. They saw MacGraw's empire as ripe for the taking. A violent feud erupted, marked by shootings and firebombings. MacGraw's home was attacked with grenades and gunfire. For the first time, the mastermind was in a war he couldn't control with bribes and alliances. The police, seeing an opportunity, intensified their pressure on his organization. A major police operation was launched to finally bring him to justice. In 2007, facing both a violent gang war and imminent prosecution, MacGraw's health failed. Tam MacGraw died of a heart attack in 2007 at the age of 53. His death occurred while he was awaiting trial on serious criminal charges. The case against him was therefore never tested in a court of law. With his death, the Barlinark team rapidly disintegrated. The organization was too dependent on his unique leadership and intelligence. The vacuum he left was quickly filled by other, more fragmented groups. Tam MacGraw's story represents the evolution of Scottish organized crime. He was a corporate gangster for the modern age. He showed that it was possible to build a vast empire with minimal violence. His methods relied on guile, corruption, and business acumen. But his story also shows the inherent instability of criminal empires. They are vulnerable to internal weakness, external threats, and state attention. He died a wealthy man, but he died looking over his shoulder, his health broken. His empire almost immediately crumbled after his death. It was a Pyrrhic victory, demonstrating the ultimate emptiness of his pursuits.
Part 4. The Transformation, Jimmy Boyle's Journey. The story of Jimmy Boyle stands apart in the annals of Scottish criminal history. While others remain trapped in cycles of violence, his narrative took an extraordinary turn. Boyle's life represents one of the most remarkable cases of rehabilitation in modern penal history. His journey from Scotland's most violent prisoner to celebrated artist and author is unparalleled. James, Jimmy Boyle, was born in the Gorbals in 1944. This district of Glasgow was then one of the most deprived areas in Europe. His childhood was marked by extreme poverty and family instability. His father was largely absent, and his mother struggled to raise him alone. He entered the criminal justice system at a very young age. Approved schools and detention centers became familiar institutions to him. These institutions often functioned as universities of crime for young offenders. They hardened him rather than reformed him, reinforcing his criminal identity. By his teenage years, Boyle was a feared and notorious figure in Glasgow. He became a leading member of the Cumbie, a violent gang from the Gorbals. His reputation was built on his willingness to use extreme violence. He was known for carrying a sharpened bicycle chain as a weapon. The judicial system struggled to contain his violent behavior. Short sentences and detention seemed to have no rehabilitative effect. In 1967, his life reached a critical turning point. He was involved in a violent altercation at a pub in Glasgow. A man named William "Babs" Rooney was killed during this incident. Boyle was arrested and charged with murder. He maintained his innocence throughout the legal process. The trial attracted significant media attention. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. This was during a period when capital punishment had recently been abolished. His initial years in prison were marked by relentless conflict. He was deemed so disruptive that authorities transferred him between multiple facilities. The peak of his institutional violence came at Inverness Prison. He was placed in the notorious cages, special isolation units for unmanageable prisoners. These units employed severe sensory deprivation techniques. Prisoners were kept in Spartan conditions with minimal human contact. This environment only amplified Boyle's anger and resistance. He responded with more violence, attacking prison officers and destroying property. He was considered beyond redemption by the prison authorities. The system had failed to break his cycle of violence through punishment alone. In 1973, a radical experiment changed the course of his life. He was transferred to the Barlinnie Special Unit in Glasgow. This was an experimental prison unit based on revolutionary principles. It emphasized rehabilitation through art, education, and self-governance. The environment stood contrast to traditional prisons. Prisoners had freedom of movement within the unit. They could wear their own clothes and prepare their own meals. Most importantly, they had access to art materials and educational resources. Initially, Boyle was suspicious and resistant to this new approach. The freedom and responsibility were unfamiliar and unsettling. However, a visiting artist introduced him to sculpture. He discovered an unexpected talent and passion for creating art. The physical act of sculpting became a channel for his pent-up emotions. The rage that had defined his life found expression through creativity rather than violence.
He produced powerful, raw works that gained recognition beyond prison walls. His sculpture, The Phoenix, symbolized his own rising from the ashes of his past. Simultaneously, he began to educate himself. He read voraciously, exploring philosophy, literature, and political theory. He started writing, initially through letters and later more formal works. His autobiography, A Sense of Freedom, began taking shape during this period. The transformation was neither quick nor easy. There were setbacks and moments of regression, but the supportive environment of the special unit allowed for growth. In 1982, after 15 years in prison, Boyle was released. His release was controversial and attracted media scrutiny. Many doubted the sincerity of his transformation. He faced the challenge of rebuilding his life in a world that remembered only his past crimes. He married Sarah Trevelyan, a psychiatrist he had met during his rehabilitation. They moved to London, where he continued his artistic career. His sculptures began selling for substantial sums. He exhibited his work in prestigious galleries internationally. Beyond his artistic success, he became a vocal advocate for penal reform. He argued passionately for rehabilitation over pure punishment. His own experience served as powerful evidence for his arguments. In 1994, he founded the Gateway Exchange in Edinburgh. This project aimed to help disadvantaged young people avoid criminal paths. It provided arts education and mentorship opportunities. The project reflected his belief in the transformative power of creativity. Boyle's later life has not been without controversy. Some critics question the narrative of complete rehabilitation. Others point to business dealings that have attracted scrutiny. However, his artistic achievements and social work remain significant. His story raises profound questions about crime and punishment. It challenges assumptions about whether people can fundamentally change. It demonstrates the potential of rehabilitative justice when properly implemented. The Barlini Special Unit closed in 1994, but its legacy continues through stories like Boyle's. His journey from violent gangster to respected artist remains unique. It serves as a powerful counterpoint to the stories of Thompson, MacGraw, and Ferris. While they remained trapped in their criminal identities, Boyle found a way out. His story doesn't excuse his early violence, but it does complicate simple narratives about crime. It shows that environment and opportunity can dramatically alter life trajectories. The man who was once considered irredeemable became a symbol of redemption. His life continues to inspire debates about justice, rehabilitation, and human potential.
Part 5. The Enforcer and Author, Paul Ferris. Paul Ferris emerged from the same tough Glasgow streets that produced the other figures in this narrative. However, his story took a different path, blending violence, legal battles, and eventual reinvention. Born in 1962, Ferris grew up in the Black Hill area of Glasgow. This was a district known for its poverty and social challenges. His early life was marked by the same economic hardships that affected many in post-industrial Glasgow. From a young age, he demonstrated intelligence and street smarts. These qualities, combined with a willingness to use violence, quickly brought him to attention. His criminal career began with relatively minor offenses as a juvenile. However, he quickly progressed to more serious criminal activities. He gained a reputation as an effective and feared enforcer. His lean physique and quick movements earned him the nickname the Licensee. This period saw him working for established criminal figures, including Arthur Thompson Sr. For a time, he was considered a rising star in the Thompson organization. The relationship appeared mutually beneficial in its early stages. Ferris provided enforcement capabilities, while Thompson offered protection and opportunities. However, this relationship would not remain stable for long. The turning point came with the deteriorating relationship between Ferris and Arthur Thompson, Jr. The two young men represented different aspects of the criminal world. Thompson, Jr. was the heir apparent, while Ferris was the self-made enforcer. Their personal conflicts reflected deeper tensions within the organization. The situation escalated dramatically in the late 1980s. The shooting of Arthur Thompson, Jr. in 1987 became a pivotal event. Ferris was immediately considered a prime suspect in the attack. Though he has always denied involvement, the Thompson family believed otherwise. This event triggered one of the most violent periods in Glasgow's criminal history. A deadly feud erupted between Ferris and the Thompson organization. Ferris proved to be an elusive and cunning target during this period. He survived multiple assassination attempts, which enhanced his reputation. His ability to evade these attacks suggested careful planning and good intelligence. The conflict drew in other criminal factions, creating complex alliances. The police found themselves investigating multiple connected violent incidents. In 1992, Ferris faced his most significant legal challenge. He stood trial at the High Court in Edinburgh on multiple serious charges. The charges included murder and conspiracy to murder. The trial became one of the longest and most expensive in Scottish legal history. Media coverage was intense, with daily reports on the proceedings. The case against Ferris relied heavily on the testimony of a police informant. The credibility of this witness became a central issue in the trial. After extensive legal arguments and witness testimony, the jury reached its verdict. Paul Ferris was acquitted of all charges. The acquittal was a stunning legal victory for Ferris and his team. It represented a significant defeat for the prosecution and police. The case raised questions about witness reliability and investigative methods. However, Ferris's legal troubles were far from over. In 1996, he faced another major trial, this time for drug smuggling charges. The case involved a conspiracy to smuggle drugs into Barlinnie prison. This time, the outcome was different. Ferris was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. This prison term marked another turning point in his life. During his incarceration, he began to focus on writing and education. He started working on his autobiography and studying legal matters. This period of reflection and intellectual activity would shape his future direction. Upon his release from prison, Ferris presented a new public image. He emerged as a published author, with his first book detailing his life story. This began a new career as a writer and commentator. He has since written multiple books, including autobiographies and crime novels. His works offer his perspective on the criminal world and his experiences. He has also engaged with media outlets as a commentator on criminal matters. This reinvention has been met with mixed reactions. Some view it as a genuine attempt at reform and a new beginning. Others remain skeptical, seeing it as a continuation of his criminal career by other means. Law enforcement officials have consistently expressed doubts about his transformation. The debate about Paul Ferris continues to this day. His story raises questions about redemption and reinvention. It demonstrates the complex relationship between crime and media. His ability to shape his own narrative through writing is noteworthy. The case of Paul Ferris shows how criminal figures can transition to other roles. It also highlights the enduring interest in stories from the criminal underworld. His life provides insights into the legal system and its challenges. It shows how difficult it can be to prosecute sophisticated criminal figures. The various trials involving Ferris exposed weaknesses in the justice system. They also demonstrated the resources required for major organized crime cases. Today, Paul Ferris remains a controversial and divisive figure. His supporters point to his writing and his distance from violent crime. His detractors question his motives and the accuracy of his accounts. What remains clear is that his life story continues to fascinate and divide opinion. His journey from feared enforcer to published author is unique. It represents another possible path for those involved in serious criminality. However, the shadow of his past actions continues to follow him. The story of Paul Ferris completes our picture of this era in Glasgow's history. Together with Thompson, MacGraw, and Boyle, he represents a different response to similar circumstances. His life, like theirs, serves as a cautionary tale about the costs of criminal involvement. It also shows the possibility of change, however contested that change might be.
Part 6. The Violent Feud, Thompson versus Ferris. The conflict between Arthur Thompson and Paul Ferris represents one of the most intense periods in Glasgow's criminal history. This was not merely a business dispute, but a deeply personal vendetta that would have far-reaching consequences. The roots of this feud lay in the shifting dynamics of power within the city's underworld. Arthur Thompson Sr. had established himself as the dominant figure over decades. His approach combined strategic thinking with ruthless enforcement when necessary. Paul Ferris represented a new generation, younger, more ambitious, and less bound by traditional codes. The initial relationship between these two figures was complex. Ferris had worked for Thompson as an enforcer during his early criminal career. This period saw Ferris carrying out various tasks for the Thompson organization. However, the relationship began to deteriorate for several reasons. Personal conflicts between Ferris and Arthur Thompson Jr. created significant tension. The younger Thompson was seen as the heir to his father's criminal empire. His behavior and approach differed markedly from Ferris's more disciplined methods. Reports suggest Arthur Jr. was less careful and more volatile than his father. This created friction within the organization and with associated figures like Ferris. The situation reached a critical point in 1987 with the shooting of Arthur Thompson Jr. He was lured to a garage in Barlinark under false pretenses. There he was ambushed and shot multiple times at close range. Miraculously, he survived the attack, but suffered life-changing injuries. The shooting sent shockwaves through Glasgow's criminal community. Arthur Thompson Sr. immediately suspected Paul Ferris of involvement. Whether Ferris was directly responsible remains a subject of debate. What's clear is that Thompson believed Ferris was behind the attack. This belief triggered a war that would consume both men for years. The response from the Thompson organization was swift and brutal. A series of retaliatory attacks targeted Ferris and his associates. Ferris proved remarkably adept at surviving these attempts on his life. His ability to evade assassination attempts became legendary in criminal circles. This period saw violence escalate across Glasgow. Shootings, firebombings, and brutal assaults became common. The police found themselves investigating multiple connected incidents. Strathclyde police dedicated significant resources to containing the violence. The conflict drew in other criminal factions throughout the city. Some aligned with Thompson, others with Ferris, creating complex alliances. This turned what began as a personal feud into a wider criminal war. The economic impact on criminal operations was significant. Normal business activities were disrupted by the constant state of alert. Law enforcement attention made standard criminal operations more difficult. The violence also attracted unwanted media attention. Newspapers covered the escalating conflict in detail. This public scrutiny put additional pressure on all involved. For the communities where these events unfolded, the impact was severe. Innocent bystanders were sometimes caught in the firecross. The climate of fear affected daily life in affected neighborhoods. Local businesses suffered from the instability and violence. Through all this, the legal system worked to bring those responsible to justice. Multiple arrests were made in connection with various incidents. However, securing convictions proved challenging. Witness intimidation was a significant problem for prosecutors. Many potential witnesses were too frightened to testify. Those who did come forward often faced retaliation. The police employed various strategies to combat this issue. Protected witness programs were used in some cases. Undercover operations gathered intelligence on the feuding factions. Despite these efforts, the violence continued for several years. The personal toll on both main protagonists was immense. Arthur Thompson Sr. saw his health deteriorate under the stress. The man who had ruled Glasgow's underworld for decades was now visibly aging. His son's condition remained poor, a constant reminder of the attack. For Paul Ferris, life became a series of safe houses in constant vigilance. The pressure of being a hunted man took its own toll. Normal family life became impossible under these circumstances. The feud reached its legal climax with Ferris's 1992 trial. The charges included murder and conspiracy to murder. The trial lasted for months and cost millions of pounds. Hundreds of witnesses were called to testify. The case against Ferris ultimately collapsed. Key witnesses changed their stories or refused to testify. The prosecution case unraveled amid allegations of witness intimidation. Ferris's acquittal was a major victory for him personally. However, it did little to resolve the underlying conflict. The animosity between the factions continued, though with less public violence. Both sides seemed to recognize that the conflict had reached a stalemate. The costs, both personal and financial, had become too high. When Arthur Thompson Sr. died in 1993, the feud lost much of its momentum. His passing marked an end of an era in Glasgow's criminal history. The Thompson organization never recovered from his death and the preceding conflict. Paul Ferris would face his own legal challenges in subsequent years. But the intense personal war between these two figures had run its course. The legacy of this conflict remains significant. It demonstrated the destructive potential of personal vendettas in organized crime. It showed how quickly violence could escalate when honor and reputation were at stake. For law enforcement, it highlighted the challenges of investigating criminal feuds. Witness intimidation remained a persistent problem. The resources required for such investigations were enormous. For the communities affected, the memory of this period remains vivid. The violence left scars that would take years to heal. The Thompson-Ferris feud serves as a cautionary tale about the true costs of criminal conflict. It shows that even for the victors, the price of victory is often too high.
Part 7. The Business of Crime, MacGraw's Empire. Tam MacGraw's approach to criminal enterprise represented a significant evolution in Scottish organized crime. Where previous generations relied heavily on intimidation and violence, MacGraw embraced business principles. His organization, known as the Barlanark Team, operated with corporate efficiency and structure. The nickname the licensee reflected his view that he had a license to print money through his operations. MacGraw's criminal empire was built on several key pillars that demonstrated his strategic thinking. Drug trafficking formed the foundation of his wealth and influence. He recognized earlier than many that narcotics represented the future of organized crime. The profits from drugs far exceeded those from traditional criminal activities. His organization focused primarily on cannabis and ecstasy during the 1990s. These drugs were in high demand and offered better profit margins than heroin. The scale of his operations was industrial rather than street level. He established sophisticated supply chains from production centers in Europe. Drugs were imported through various methods, including hidden compartments in vehicles. The distribution network reached across Scotland and into other parts of the UK. MacGraw's genius lay in his understanding of logistics and risk management. He created multiple layers between himself and the actual drug transactions. This insulation made it difficult for law enforcement to connect him directly to specific crimes. The structure of his organization was deliberately compartmentalized. Different cells handled specific aspects of the operation. Some focused on importation, others on distribution, and separate groups handled finances. This meant that if one part was compromised, the entire operation wouldn't collapse. Money laundering was another area where MacGraw demonstrated innovation. He understood that criminal wealth was useless if it couldn't be spent openly. His approach to money laundering was both sophisticated and diverse. He invested heavily in legitimate businesses across various sectors. Pub and nightclub ownership provided excellent venues for laundering money. The cash-intensive nature of these businesses made them ideal for mixing illegal and legal funds. Property development became another major investment area. The large transactions and complex financing made it easy to hide illicit funds. He also owned more surprising ventures, like a children's soft play center. This diversity helped spread risk and create multiple streams of legitimate-looking income. MacGraw's personal lifestyle reflected his business success. He lived in a custom-built mansion and drove expensive cars. His public image was that of a successful businessman rather than a criminal. This presentation helped him maintain a degree of social acceptance. Unlike many of his contemporaries, MacGraw avoided overt violence when possible. He preferred to use financial pressure and strategic alliances. Bribery and corruption were tools he used effectively. He cultivated contacts within various official institutions. These contacts provided early warnings about police investigations. They also helped him navigate legal challenges when they arose. His ability to avoid conviction became legendary in criminal circles. Between 1990 and 2000, he faced multiple major investigations. These included operations targeting drug trafficking and money laundering. Yet he consistently avoided significant prison time. The cases against him often collapsed due to witness problems. Some witnesses changed their stories. Others refused to testify. The prosecution frequently struggled to prove his direct involvement. Law enforcement agencies found him a frustratingly elusive target. They knew he was directing a major criminal enterprise. Proving it in court, however, proved exceptionally difficult. MacGraw's relationship with his community was complex and carefully managed. In Barlinark, he cultivated an image as a local benefactor. He was known to help families in financial difficulty. He donated to local sports teams and community organizations. This generosity created significant local support. Many residents saw him as a positive force in the community. This support made it difficult for police to gather intelligence. People were reluctant to speak against someone who had helped them. The wall of silence protected him for many years. However, this public image contrasted sharply with reality. The drugs his organization sold caused immense harm in communities. Addiction rates soared in areas where his products were available. Families were destroyed by the consequences of drug abuse. The social cost of his operations was enormous. Yet MacGraw successfully distanced himself from these consequences. He presented himself as separate from the street-level damage. As his empire grew, so did the challenges he faced. Law enforcement resources dedicated to targeting him increased. New legislation provided additional tools for investigating organized crime. Asset recovery laws threatened his carefully accumulated wealth. Rival criminal groups eyed his successful operations jealously. The Daniels family emerged as particularly aggressive competitors. They were younger, more violent, and less constrained by tradition. The pressure from multiple directions began to take its toll. MacGraw's health suffered under the constant stress. His heart condition worsened, requiring medical attention. The once untouchable criminal entrepreneur was showing vulnerabilities. The final years of his empire would test all his skills and resources. The business model that had served him so well began to fray at the edges.
Part 8. The Power of Redemption. Jimmy Boyle's Legacy. Jimmy Boyle's journey through the criminal justice system represents one of the most extraordinary transformations in modern penal history. His story continues to inspire debates about rehabilitation, punishment, and the possibility of fundamental human change. The path from violent prisoner to celebrated artist was neither straight nor easy. It required confronting deep-seated patterns of behavior and thought. The Barlini Special Unit, where this transformation occurred, was a revolutionary experiment. It challenged conventional wisdom about how to handle the most difficult prisoners. The unit's philosophy was radical for its time. It operated on the principle that even the most violent individuals could change. Prisoners were given unprecedented levels of responsibility and freedom. They could wear their own clothes and prepare their own meals. More importantly, they had access to education and creative materials. This environment represented a complete departure from traditional prison methods. For Boyle, the initial adjustment to this new system was challenging. The freedom and trust were unfamiliar and unsettling. His first instinct was to test the boundaries and challenge the authorities. However, the consistent and patient approach of the staff began to have an effect. The breakthrough came when he discovered sculpture. The physical act of working with stone and clay became transformative. It provided an outlet for emotions that had previously found expression only in violence. His early works were raw and powerful, reflecting his inner turmoil. As he continued working, his technique improved and his style evolved. The process of creation became a form of therapy and self-discovery. Education played an equally important role in his transformation. He began reading voraciously, exploring subjects from philosophy to literature. This intellectual awakening opened new ways of thinking about the world. He started writing, initially through letters and journals. This developed into more formal writing, including his autobiography. The act of writing forced him to examine his life and choices critically. The staff at the special unit played a crucial role in this process. They provided support and guidance without judgment. They recognized his intelligence and creativity and encouraged their development. This positive reinforcement was essential for building his self-esteem. The transformation was not immediate or linear. There were setbacks and moments of regression. Old habits and thought patterns sometimes resurfaced, but the supportive environment allowed for recovery and continued growth. His relationships with other prisoners also evolved. He began to take on mentoring roles with younger inmates. This responsibility helped solidify his own commitment to change. The publication of his autobiography, A Sense of Freedom, was a pivotal moment. The book provided a raw, honest account of his life and transformation. It became an international bestseller and was later adapted for television. The success of the book brought public attention to his story. It also sparked controversy about the rehabilitation of violent offenders. Many questioned whether such a dramatic change was possible or genuine. Upon his release in 1982, Boyle faced the challenge of rebuilding his life. The transition from prison to freedom is always difficult. For someone with his notoriety, the challenges were multiplied. Every aspect of his life was subject to public scrutiny. He married Sarah Trevelyan, who had been involved in his rehabilitation. They moved to London, where he continued his artistic career. His sculptures began to attract attention from the art world. Gallery exhibitions and sales followed, establishing his new professional identity.
The quality of his work earned him respect in artistic circles. His sculptures commanded significant prices, providing financial stability. Beyond his artistic success, he became involved in social projects. The Gateway Exchange in Edinburgh was his most significant initiative. This project aimed to help disadvantaged young people. It provided arts education and mentorship opportunities. The project reflected his belief in the transformative power of creativity. It also demonstrated his commitment to giving back to society. His later career has included continued artistic production and writing. He has published novels and continued to exhibit his work internationally. He remains a vocal advocate for penal reform and rehabilitation. His lectures and writings on these subjects are informed by personal experience. The debate around his transformation continues decades later. Some critics question aspects of his business dealings and public statements. Others point to his sustained artistic career as evidence of genuine change. What remains undeniable is the extraordinary nature of his journey. The man who was once considered beyond redemption has led a productive life for over 40 years since his release. His story raises important questions about the justice system. It challenges us to consider what purposes prison should serve. The debate between punishment and rehabilitation continues. Boyle's experience suggests that rehabilitation is possible, even in the most challenging cases. However, it requires resources and commitment from society. The Barlini Special Unit closed in 1994, but its legacy continues. It demonstrated that alternative approaches to incarceration are possible. The stories of those who were transformed there continue to inspire. Jimmy Boyle's life stands as a testament to human resilience and the capacity for change. It shows that people are not defined solely by their worst actions. The possibility of redemption remains, even in the darkest circumstances. His story completes our understanding of the various paths available to those involved in crime. While Thompson, MacGraw, and Ferris remained within the criminal world, Boyle found a way out. His journey offers hope, but also reminds us of the work required for genuine transformation. The legacy of his story continues to influence discussions about crime and punishment. It serves as a powerful example of what can be achieved when we believe in the possibility of change.
Part 9. Law Enforcement's Battle. The Police Response. The rise of organized crime figures like Thompson, MacGraw, Boyle, and Ferris presented unprecedented challenges for Scottish law enforcement. Police forces, particularly Strathclyde Police, had to evolve their strategies to combat these sophisticated criminal networks. The traditional methods of policing were often inadequate against such organized and well-funded operations. The response required innovation, persistence, and significant resources. The initial approach to organized crime focused on reactive policing. Officers would respond to individual crimes, shootings, assaults, robberies. However, they quickly realized these were not isolated incidents, but part of larger criminal enterprises. This understanding led to the development of specialized units dedicated to organized crime. These units employed long-term investigative strategies rather than immediate responses. They focused on gathering intelligence and building comprehensive cases. The challenges they faced were numerous and complex. Witness intimidation was perhaps the most significant obstacle. People were understandably afraid to testify against powerful criminal figures. The fear of retaliation against themselves or their families was very real. This problem required creative solutions from prosecutors and police. Witness protection programs were developed and refined. Secure testimony arrangements were implemented. Still, many cases collapsed due to witness problems.
The criminal organizations used sophisticated counter-surveillance techniques. They employed lawyers to challenge police methods in court. They used legitimate businesses to hide their activities. The police had to become equally sophisticated in their approaches. Undercover operations became more common and more complex. Officers would spend months or years infiltrating criminal groups. The risks were enormous, but the intelligence gathered was invaluable. Electronic surveillance became a crucial tool. Telephone intercepts required careful legal authorization. The evidence gathered had to be meticulously documented to stand up in court. The introduction of new legislation helped considerably. Laws targeting organized crime specifically gave police additional powers. Asset recovery laws allowed authorities to target criminal wealth. This hit gangsters where it hurt most, their finances. The establishment of the Scottish Crime and Drug Enforcement Agency in 2000 represented a major step forward. This organization brought together expertise from various forces. It coordinated efforts against the most serious criminal networks. The agency used multi-agency approaches, working with other government departments. Tax authorities helped investigate financial crimes. Immigration officials monitored international movements. Customs officers tracked illegal shipments. This collaborative approach proved highly effective. Major operations targeted specific criminal organizations. Operation Algebra focused on Tam MacGraw's network. It involved years of intelligence gathering and surveillance. Similarly, numerous operations targeted the Thompson organization and its rivals. These investigations required immense resources and patience. A single operation might involve dozens of officers working for years. The cost was substantial but necessary. The legal process presented its own challenges. Prosecutors had to build cases that could withstand intense scrutiny. They had to anticipate defense strategies and counter them. The complexity of these cases meant trials could last for months. Jury protection became another concern in high-profile cases. The pressure on everyone involved was immense. Despite these efforts, securing convictions remained difficult. The standard of proof in criminal cases is high. Criminal organizations designed their operations to avoid leaving evidence. Key figures like MacGraw and Thompson were masters of insulation. They ensured multiple layers separated them from actual criminal acts. This made proving direct involvement extremely challenging. The police response evolved to meet these challenges. Proactive policing became the standard approach. Rather than waiting for crimes to occur, police worked to prevent them. They targeted the infrastructure of criminal organizations. Money laundering operations were disrupted. Supply chains for drugs were identified and dismantled. Associates were pressured to cooperate. Community policing played an important role in this strategy. Building trust in communities affected by organized crime was crucial. When people believed the police could protect them, they were more willing to cooperate. This required consistent, visible policing presence. International cooperation became increasingly important. Scottish police worked with forces across Europe and beyond. Drug trafficking routes often crossed multiple jurisdictions. Sharing intelligence and coordinating operations was essential. The learning curve for law enforcement was steep. Each new generation of criminals presented new challenges. The police had to adapt continuously to changing tactics. Training programs evolved to prepare officers for these complex investigations. Forensic capabilities advanced significantly. DNA analysis and other scientific techniques improved. Digital forensics became crucial as criminals used technology. Financial investigation skills became specialized disciplines. The human cost of this work was significant. Officers faced constant threats to their safety. The psychological pressure of long-term undercover work was immense. Families of officers involved in high-profile cases needed protection. Despite these challenges, police efforts achieved significant successes. Many key figures in criminal organizations were convicted. Major drug trafficking operations were disrupted. criminal assets worth millions of pounds were recovered. The work continues to this day, though the nature of organized crime has evolved. New challenges have emerged with cybercrime and international trafficking. But the lessons learned from battling these earlier crime figures remain relevant. The persistence and innovation demonstrated by Scottish law enforcement set important precedents. Their work helped make communities safer and demonstrated that no criminal is beyond the reach of the law. The battle for organized crime continues, but the foundation built during these years remains strong.
Part 10. The Drug Trade Transformation. A Society Changed. The emergence of large-scale drug trafficking in Scotland during the late 20th century represented a fundamental shift in organized crime. This transformation changed not only criminal enterprises, but also had profound effects on Scottish society. The era of Arthur Thompson Sr. had seen drugs as one criminal enterprise among many. By the time Tam MacGraw rose to prominence, narcotics had become the primary focus. This shift brought new patterns of violence, new criminal structures, and new social problems. The economics of drug trafficking made it incredibly attractive to criminal organizations. The profit margins dwarfed those from traditional crimes like armed robbery. A single successful drug shipment could generate more revenue than a year of protection rackets. This financial incentive drove the rapid expansion of drug networks. The types of drugs being trafficked evolved over time. The 1980s saw heroin become widely available in Scottish cities. This was followed by the explosion of ecstasy and cannabis in the 1990s. Each new drug brought different distribution networks and enforcement challenges. Criminal organizations adapted their structures to the drug trade. The old territorial gang structures began to change. Networks became more fluid and business-focused. Operations spanned across traditional gang boundaries. International connections became increasingly important. Scottish crime figures established links with suppliers in Europe. Networks extended to Spain, the Netherlands, and beyond. This globalization of crime presented new challenges for law enforcement. The violence associated with the drug trade differed from previous criminal conflicts. Disputes were no longer just about territory or personal honor. They were about control of extremely valuable supply lines and markets. The stakes were higher, and the responses were often more extreme. Firearms became more common in criminal disputes. The level of violence escalated significantly. Innocent bystanders were more frequently caught in the crossfire. The social impact of widespread drug availability was devastating. Communities across Scotland experienced rising addiction rates. Families were torn apart by substance abuse. Property crime increased as addicts sought to fund their habits. The healthcare system faced new challenges in treating addiction. Emergency services dealt with overdoses and drug-related violence. Mental health services saw increased demand. The economic cost to society was enormous. Law enforcement resources were stretched thin. Police had to develop new expertise in combating drug networks. Customs and border agencies faced increased smuggling attempts. The court system became clogged with drug-related cases. Prisons saw their populations swell with drug offenders. The response from authorities evolved over time. Initial approaches focused on enforcement and punishment. There was significant political pressure to be tough on drugs. This led to mandatory sentences and increased police powers. However, it became clear that enforcement alone wasn't working. Health-based approaches began to gain traction. Needle exchange programs were introduced. Methadone programs sought to manage heroin addiction. Drug treatment services expanded, though often inadequately funded. Prevention programs targeted young people in schools. Community initiatives worked to reduce demand. The media played a complex role in this transformation. Sensational coverage sometimes glamorized drug dealers. The term drug baron entered common usage. This coverage could inadvertently promote the very figures it sought to condemn.
At the same time, responsible journalism highlighted the human cost. Stories of addiction and ruined lives served as warnings. Investigative reporting exposed criminal networks. The business model of drug trafficking continued to evolve. Criminal organizations became more sophisticated. Money laundering operations grew in complexity. Legitimate businesses were used to hide illicit profits. The professionalization of crime continued. Some organizations operated almost like corporations. They had management structures and business plans. They diversified their operations across multiple criminal activities. The impact on Scottish cities was visible and lasting. Certain areas became known as centers of drug activity. Communities struggled with the associated problems. Generations were affected by addiction and its consequences. Law enforcement efforts achieved some successes. Major trafficking operations were disrupted. Key figures were imprisoned. Assets were seized. But the drug trade proved resilient. New suppliers always emerged to replace those who were caught. New drugs appeared on the market. The pattern continued despite enforcement efforts. The legacy of this era remains with Scotland today. Drug-related deaths remain a serious problem. Organized crime continues to be dominated by drug trafficking. Communities still deal with the consequences. Understanding this transformation is crucial. It helps explain the current landscape of organized crime. It informs policy decisions about enforcement and treatment. It provides lessons for dealing with future challenges. The story of Scotland's drug trade is not just about criminals and police. It is about communities and families. It is about economic forces and social conditions. It is a complex story with no simple solutions. The experience of these decades shows that drug trafficking transforms everything it touches. Criminal organizations, law enforcement, communities, all are changed by its presence. The challenge remains finding effective responses to this ongoing problem.
Part 11. The Media and the Myth. Public Perception of Crime. The relationship between Scottish organized crime and the media created a complex narrative that shaped public perception for decades. Newspapers, television, and later digital media played crucial roles in how these criminal figures were understood by the public. The media coverage often walked a fine line between reporting facts and creating legends. This dynamic influenced not only public opinion, but sometimes even the criminals themselves. The Glasgow media scene had particular characteristics that affected crime coverage. Local newspapers maintained extensive crime reporting teams. They cultivated sources within both law enforcement and criminal circles. This gave them access to breaking stories, but also created certain obligations. The tabloid press developed a distinctive style for covering gangland figures. Sensational headlines grabbed attention and sold papers. Nicknames like The Godfather and The Licensee entered public consciousness. These labels often stuck, becoming part of how these men were perceived. The coverage evolved significantly over the decades. In the early years of Thompson's career, reporting was more restrained. As competition increased, coverage became more aggressive. The 1980s and 1990s saw particularly intense media scrutiny. High-profile trials became media spectacles. The Paul Ferris trial in 1992 received daily front-page coverage. Journalists competed for exclusive interviews and inside information. The costs and details of trials were reported extensively. This coverage had multiple effects on public understanding. It educated people about the scale of organized crime. It revealed the sophisticated methods used by criminal enterprises. But it also risked glamorizing the subjects of these stories. The criminals themselves were often aware of their media image. Some learned to manipulate coverage to their advantage. Others used media attention to build their reputations. A few attempted to use the press to send messages to rivals. The phenomenon of the gangster memoir added another layer. Books by and about criminals became popular.
These accounts offered insider perspectives, but raised questions about authenticity. The commercial success of these works created new dilemmas. Television and film adaptations brought these stories to wider audiences. Documentaries explored the criminal underworld. Dramatizations took creative liberties with real events. These productions reached international viewers. The digital age transformed media coverage completely. Online news allowed for instant updates. Social media created new platforms for discussion. Historical cases found new audiences online. Law enforcement had to adapt to this changing media landscape. Police communication strategies evolved. Press conferences became more sophisticated. Social media monitoring became part of investigations. The media sometimes aided police efforts. Public appeals for information helped solve cases. Crime reconstructions brought forward new witnesses. Investigative journalism exposed criminal activities. However, tensions often existed between police and press. Journalists sometimes published information that compromised investigations. Sources within law enforcement leaked sensitive details. The timing of stories could affect ongoing operations. The families of those involved faced their own challenges with media attention. Innocent relatives found themselves in the spotlight. Children had to deal with their father's notoriety at school. The lasting impact on these families was seldom discussed. The victims of crime sometimes felt overlooked in media coverage. Their stories received less attention than the criminals. The human cost of organized crime was not always fully explored. Sensational aspects often dominated the narrative. Academic researchers studied the media's role in shaping crime perception. They analyzed how language and framing affected public understanding. They examined the long-term social impacts of crime coverage. Their work provided valuable insights into this complex relationship. The ethical questions surrounding crime reporting remained challenging. How much detail should be published about criminal methods? What responsibility did media have to avoid glorification? How could the public interest be balanced against other considerations? The business realities of media also influenced coverage. Circulation figures and viewer ratings mattered. Competition drove outlets to pursue dramatic stories. Commercial pressures sometimes conflicted with journalistic standards. In recent years, more reflective coverage has emerged. Documentaries examining the social roots of crime, investigations into the lasting community impacts, analysis of policy responses and their effectiveness. The historical record now includes multiple perspectives. Police memoirs offer law enforcement viewpoints. Academic studies provide sociological analysis. Community voices share their experiences. The digital archive preserves this complex history. Online databases contain decades of newspaper coverage. Court records and trial transcripts are more accessible. Historical photographs and footage are available. This comprehensive record allows for deeper understanding. It helps separate myth from reality. It provides context for individual stories. It shows patterns across different eras. The media's role in the story of Scottish organized crime remains significant. It shaped how these events were understood at the time. It continues to influence how they are remembered today. The relationship between crime and media continues to evolve. New challenges emerge with digital platforms. Social media creates new dynamics. The essential questions about responsible reporting remain. Understanding this history helps inform current practice. It shows the power of media in shaping social narrative. It highlights the importance of ethical journalism. It demonstrates the need for multiple perspectives. The story of Scottish organized crime is incomplete without considering the media's role. The coverage was part of the phenomenon itself. It influenced the players and the public. It remains an essential chapter in this complex history. Part 12. The Web of Connections, Relationships and Rivalries. The Scottish criminal underworld of the late 20th century was not simply a collection of independent operators. It functioned as a complex ecosystem with intricate relationships and shifting alliances. Understanding the connections between these figures reveals much about how organized crime operated. The web of relationships extended beyond simple business partnerships or rivalries. Arthur Thompson Sr. stood at the center of this web for many years. His position as the acknowledged godfather meant most criminal activities connected to him in some way. He maintained relationships with figures across the United Kingdom and beyond. These connections facilitated various criminal enterprises. Drug importation required international contacts. Money laundering operations needed financial expertise. The movement of stolen goods demanded distribution networks. Thompson's relationship with Paul Ferris demonstrated how alliances could turn toxic. What began as a mentor-protégé dynamic deteriorated into one of Scotland's most violent feuds. The breakdown was both personal and professional. It involved clashes of personality and competing business interests. The shooting of Arthur Thompson Jr. became the point of no return. This event triggered years of violence and retaliation. It drew in numerous other criminal figures who had to choose sides. Some supported Thompson out of loyalty or fear. Others saw opportunity in aligning with the ambitious Ferris. Tam MacGraw operated somewhat separately from this particular conflict. His approach was more corporate and less personal. He focused on building his drug empire with military precision. However, he couldn't completely avoid the wider criminal landscape. His organization sometimes clashed with other groups over territory. The competition for control of drug markets was intense. Disputes over pricing and supply routes occasionally turned violent. MacGraw generally preferred negotiation to confrontation when possible. His business mindset made him seek profitable solutions rather than violent ones. This approach sometimes put him at odds with more traditional gangsters. Jimmy Boyle's story intersected with these others mainly through the prison system. His reputation as Scotland's most violent prisoner preceded him. Other criminals knew of him even if they hadn't met him personally. His transformation in the special unit occurred separately from the street conflicts. The criminal landscape was further complicated by generational differences. Thompson represented the old-school approach. MacGraw embodied the new business model. Ferris fell somewhere between these two extremes. The younger generation coming up learned from all of them. They saw what worked and what didn't. They understood the importance of avoiding prison. They recognized the value of legitimate-looking businesses. Law enforcement understood these connections better over time. Police mapping of criminal relationships became more sophisticated. They tracked meetings and communications. They understood how money flowed between different groups. This understanding helped them build more comprehensive cases. The media sometimes oversimplified these relationships. Stories focused on individual conflicts rather than systemic connections. The complex business arrangements received less attention than the violence. This created a distorted public perception of how organized crime actually worked. Financial connections often proved more important than personal ones. Money laundering networks linked apparently separate operations. Legitimate businesses owned by different criminals sometimes collaborated. Professional service providers like lawyers and accountants served multiple clients. These financial interconnections made the entire system more resilient. If one part was compromised, others could continue operating. Money could be moved between different operations. Assets could be hidden through complex ownership structures. The social connections within communities added another layer. Many of these criminals grew up in the same neighborhoods. They attended the same schools and knew the same people. Family relationships sometimes crossed organizational boundaries. These social ties created obligations and loyalties that complicated business relationships. A criminal might hesitate to move against someone connected to his family. Old friendships sometimes overrode business considerations. Local community expectations influenced behavior. The prison system served as another connection point. Criminals from different organizations met inside. They formed new alliances and shared information. Prison became a networking opportunity for some. Upon release, these new connections could lead to different business arrangements. The overall picture that emerges is of a deeply interconnected world. It wasn't simply a series of independent criminal enterprises. Rather, it functioned as an ecosystem with its own rules and relationships. Understanding these connections is crucial to understanding how organized crime persisted. Law enforcement eventually recognized this reality. They moved from targeting individuals to targeting networks. They focused on disrupting the connections between different elements. This approach proved more effective than simply going after individual criminals. The story of Scottish organized crime is ultimately a story about relationships, how they form, how they function, and how they fall apart. The personal conflicts and alliances shaped the criminal landscape as much as business considerations. The human element remained central despite the increasing professionalization. This complex web of connections continues to evolve today. New figures emerge and form new relationships. The basic dynamics remain surprisingly consistent. Understanding this history helps understand the present. The legacy of these relationships continues to influence Scottish organized crime. The lessons learned by both criminals and police continue to inform their actions. The story continues, even as the specific players change.
Part 13. The Human Cost. Communities and Victims. The story of organised crime in Scotland cannot be fully understood without examining its impact on ordinary people. Behind the headlines about gangsters and their empires lies a deeper story of communities affected by their activities. The human cost of organised crime extends far beyond the immediate victims of violence. It touches families, neighbourhoods, and entire generations in profound ways. The residents of areas where these criminals operated faced daily challenges. Many lived in fear of speaking out or cooperating with police. The climate of intimidation affected community cohesion and trust. People learned to mind their own business and avoid drawing attention. Local businesses often found themselves caught between competing pressures. Some paid protection money to avoid trouble. Others faced damage to their property or threats to their safety. A few became unwilling fronts for money laundering operations. The drug trade brought particularly devastating consequences. Addiction destroyed individual lives and family relationships. Parents watched their children succumb to substance abuse. Children grew up in households dominated by drug use and dealing. The cycle of addiction often passed from one generation to the next. Young people saw few positive role models in their communities. The flashy lifestyles of drug dealers could seem appealing compared to legitimate work. This created a perpetual recruitment pool for criminal organizations. The educational impact on children in affected areas was significant. Schools in these neighbourhoods faced special challenges. Teachers worked to overcome the influence of criminal role models. Some students struggled to see the value in education when illegal money seemed easily available. Healthcare services were stretched to their limits. Doctors treated addiction-related health problems. Hospitals dealt with overdose cases and violence-related injuries. Mental health services addressed trauma and stress disorders. The economic impact extended throughout communities. Property values often suffered in areas known for high crime rates.
legitimate businesses hesitated to invest in these neighborhoods. Employment opportunities became even scarcer. The victims of direct violence carried both physical and psychological scars. Those injured in shootings or attacks faced long recoveries. Family members of murder victims endured unimaginable grief. Witnesses to violence suffered from post-traumatic stress. The legal process often added to the burden. Court cases could drag on for years. Witnesses faced intimidation and fear. The media attention invaded their privacy. Many felt the justice system failed to provide adequate protection or support. The families of the criminals themselves experienced their own forms of suffering. Wives and partners lived with constant worry about their safety. Children grew up with a stigma of their father's notoriety. Many faced bullying at school and suspicion in their communities. Some family members became targets for rivals seeking revenge. Others struggled with their own moral dilemmas about their loved ones' activities. The pressure on these families was immense and unrelenting. Community organizations worked to counteract these negative influences. Youth workers tried to provide positive alternatives to crime. Social services attempted to support vulnerable families. Community centers offered safe spaces for young people. But their efforts were often overwhelmed by the scale of the problems. Law enforcement faced its own challenges in dealing with communities. Building trust was difficult when people feared retaliation. Witness protection programs had limited effectiveness. Many crimes went unreported because people didn't believe anything would change. The media coverage sometimes compounded these problems. Sensational stories could reinforce negative stereotypes about certain areas. Residents felt stigmatized by their postcodes. The constant focus on crime overshadowed positive community developments. Yet, within these challenges, stories of resilience emerged. Community activists worked tirelessly to improve their neighborhoods. Former criminals sometimes returned to warn young people away from crime. Victims found strength in supporting each other. Local businesses that resisted intimidation became community pillars. Teachers who refused to give up on their students made lasting differences. Social workers helped families break cycles of addiction and crime. The recovery process for affected communities has been long and difficult. Some areas have seen significant improvement over time. Others continue to struggle with a legacy of organized crime. The patterns established during the peak years of criminal activity proved hard to break. Understanding this human cost is essential for several reasons. It provides a more complete picture of organized crime's true impact. It helps explain why certain communities face persistent challenges. It informs more effective policy responses. Prevention programs must address the root causes that make crime appealing. Rehabilitation services need to understand the environments people come from. Law enforcement strategies must consider community dynamics. The story of Scottish organised crime is ultimately about people. The criminals who chose this path, the law enforcement officers who pursued them, the community members who lived with the consequences, and the victims who suffered from their actions.
Part 14. The Legacy Continues. Modern Scottish Organised Crime.
The landscape of Scottish organized crime has undergone significant transformation since the era of Thompson, MacGraw, Boyle, and Ferris. While their stories belong to a specific historical period, the criminal enterprises they helped shape continued to evolve in the 21st century. Understanding this evolution requires examining how organized crime has adapted to new technologies, global markets, and law enforcement strategies. The basic drivers of organized crime remain consistent: the pursuit of profit through illegal means. However, the methods and structures have changed dramatically. The hierarchical model exemplified by Arthur Thompson has largely given way to more fluid networks. Modern criminal organizations often operate as loose alliances rather than rigid hierarchies. This makes them more resilient to law enforcement targeting. The removal of one figure no longer guarantees the collapse of an entire organization. The drug trade continues to be the primary revenue source for Scottish organized crime. The types of drugs have evolved with changing markets. Cocaine has become the dominant substance in many areas. Synthetic drugs produced in laboratories have joined traditional plant-based narcotics. The Internet has revolutionized drug distribution through dark web markets. Technology has transformed every aspect of organized crime. Encrypted communications make traditional surveillance more difficult. Cryptocurrencies provide new methods for money laundering. Social media platforms offer new recruitment and intimidation tools. Cybercrime has emerged as a major revenue stream. Scottish criminal groups engage in various online fraud schemes. Data theft and ransomware attacks represent new opportunities. Traditional crimes have been updated with technological enhancements. Law enforcement has correspondingly evolved its approaches. Police Scotland has developed sophisticated cybercrime units. International cooperation has become essential for tracking digital crimes. Financial investigation techniques have advanced significantly. Asset recovery remains a key strategy against organized crime. The Proceeds of Crime Act continues to be used effectively. Criminal finances are targeted through multiple approaches. Restraint orders prevent disposal of assets during investigations. Confiscation orders reclaim criminal wealth after conviction. Civil recovery targets property without requiring criminal conviction. These measures have made money laundering more challenging. Criminal groups have responded with increasingly sophisticated methods. Shell companies and complex corporate structures hide ownership. International banking systems are exploited to move funds. Cash-based businesses still play a role in money laundering. The international dimension of organized crime has expanded. Scottish criminal groups maintain connections across Europe. Links exist with groups in Spain, the Netherlands, and Eastern Europe. International drug trafficking routes are well established. Human trafficking has emerged as another significant criminal enterprise. Organized immigration crime generates substantial profits. Vulnerable people are exploited for labor and sexual services. Modern slavery represents a growing concern for law enforcement. The violence associated with organized crime has also evolved. Firearms remain prevalent in criminal disputes. Knife crime continues to affect Scottish communities. The methods have become more sophisticated and planned. The impact on communities remains severe. Drug addiction continues to devastate families and neighborhoods. The illegal economy undermines legitimate business development. Fear and intimidation still affect community cohesion. Law enforcement faces ongoing challenges in witness protection. Community cooperation remains difficult to secure. The fear of retaliation is a powerful deterrent to speaking out. Police work to build trust through consistent engagement. Prevention efforts have become more sophisticated. Early intervention programs target at-risk youth. Education initiatives warn about the dangers of organized crime. Community organizations work to provide positive alternatives. The media coverage of organized crime has changed. Social media provides instant dissemination of information. Rumors and misinformation can spread rapidly. Law enforcement uses social media for community engagement. The legal framework continues to evolve. New legislation addresses emerging criminal methods. Law enforcement powers are regularly reviewed and updated. International agreements facilitate cross-border cooperation. The criminal justice system faces ongoing challenges. Court backlogs delay justice for victims. Witness protection requires constant refinement. Rehabilitation programs aim to break cycles of offending. The business of crime continues to professionalize. Criminal groups employ specialists in various fields. Legal advice is used to navigate the justice system. Financial expertise helps conceal illicit wealth. The future of organized crime in Scotland will likely see further evolution. Technological advances will create new criminal opportunities. Global connections will continue to develop. Law enforcement will need to keep adapting its strategies. Understanding this evolution is crucial for effective response. Historical patterns provide valuable lessons. Current trends indicate future directions. Ongoing analysis helps shape prevention strategies. The legacy of figures like Thompson and MacGraw continues, indirectly. Their stories inform current understanding of criminal networks. Law enforcement strategies build on lessons from investigating them. Community responses incorporate hard-won knowledge. The fight against organized crime remains a constant effort. It requires resources, determination, and innovation. Success is measured in disrupted networks and protected communities. The work continues every day across Scotland.
Part 15. Conclusion. Understanding the complete picture. The stories of Arthur Thompson, Tam MacGraw, Jimmy Boyle, and Paul Ferris represent a significant chapter in Scotland's social history. These four men emerged from similar environments but followed dramatically different paths through the criminal underworld. Their lives provide valuable insights into the nature of organized crime and its impact on society. Examining their stories together allows us to draw important conclusions about this era. Arthur Thompson's legacy is that of the traditional godfather figure. He built his empire through a combination of strategic thinking and ruthless violence. His organization demonstrated how criminal power could become concentrated in one individual. However, his story also shows the limitations of this model. The dependence on a single leader made the organization vulnerable. The attempt to create a criminal dynasty ended in tragedy. His death marked the end of an era in Scottish organized crime. Tam MacGraw represented the evolution toward a more corporate approach. He showed that criminal enterprises could operate like businesses. His focus on logistics and money laundering set new standards for sophistication. Yet his story demonstrates that even the most clever criminal operations face inevitable pressures. The attention from law enforcement, combined with rival gang threats, created unsustainable pressure. His death while facing trial symbolized the ultimate failure of his criminal project. Jimmy Boyle's journey stands as a powerful exception to the typical criminal narrative. His transformation from violent prisoner to respected artist is unprecedented. It shows that rehabilitation is possible, even in the most challenging cases. However, his story also highlights how rare such transformations are. The conditions that enabled his change, the special unit,
artistic discovery, supportive relationships are exceptional. His experience offers hope, but also reminds us of how difficult genuine rehabilitation can be. Paul Ferris's story represents another unique path through the criminal world. His ability to survive multiple assassination attempts showed remarkable resilience. His legal victories demonstrated the challenges of prosecuting sophisticated criminals. His reinvention as an author raises complex questions about redemption and commercialism. His life shows how criminal figures can transition to different roles in society. However, it also shows how the shadow of past actions never completely disappears. Together, these stories reveal several important patterns about organized crime. First, they show how criminal enterprises evolve in response to opportunities. The shift from protection rackets to drug trafficking represents this adaptation. Second, they demonstrate the importance of understanding local context. These men were products of specific communities and historical circumstances. Third, they highlight the complex relationship between individual choice and environmental factors. While these men made conscious decisions to pursue crime, their options were limited by their surroundings. The law enforcement response to these figures also evolved significantly. Police methods became more sophisticated over time. The focus shifted from reactive policing to proactive intelligence gathering. International cooperation became increasingly important. Legislative changes provided new tools for combating organized crime. Asset recovery laws proved particularly effective in targeting criminal wealth. The impact on Scottish communities has been profound and lasting. The drug trade introduced new levels of addiction and social problems. Violence became more organized and more dangerous. Communities learned to live with the constant presence of organized crime. Yet within this challenging environment, stories of resilience emerged. Community organizations worked to protect young people from criminal influences. Law enforcement officers risked their lives to investigate these networks. Ordinary citizens refused to be intimidated by criminal elements. The media played a complex role in shaping public understanding. Coverage sometimes risked glamorizing criminal figures. At other times, it helped expose the true costs of organized crime. The evolution of media technology changed how these stories were told. Looking at these stories today provides important lessons for the future. They show that organized crime adapts to changing circumstances. They demonstrate that no criminal empire lasts forever. They prove that rehabilitation, while difficult, is possible. They remind us that behind every criminal statistic are human stories. For policymakers, these stories highlight the importance of addressing root causes. Poverty, lack of opportunity, and social exclusion create environments where crime can flourish. Investing in communities and education represents the most effective long-term solution. For law enforcement, the lessons include the importance of international cooperation, the need for sophisticated financial investigation capabilities, the value of witness protection programs. For society as a whole, these stories serve as cautionary tales. They show the ultimate futility of pursuing power through violence and intimidation. They demonstrate that criminal wealth often comes with unbearable costs. They remind us of the importance of strong, resilient communities. The era of these four figures has passed, but organized crime continues in new forms. The challenges have evolved, but the essential nature of the problem remains. Understanding this history helps us confront current and future challenges. It provides context for today's criminal landscape. It offers lessons from past successes and failures. Most importantly, it reminds us that organized crime is not just a law enforcement problem. It is a social problem that requires comprehensive solutions. Education, economic opportunity, community support all play crucial roles. The stories of Thompson, MacGraw, Boyle, and Ferris will continue to fascinate and inform. They represent a significant chapter in Scotland's story. They offer insights into human nature and social organization. They serve as powerful reminders of choices and consequences. As we conclude this examination, we are left with a complex picture. There are no simple answers or easy solutions, but there is understanding, and with understanding comes the possibility of progress. The work of building safer, stronger communities continues. The lessons from this era remain relevant today. The stories of these four men will continue to be told and studied. Their lives, in all their complexity, have become part of Scotland's history.